Hello, friends. Today we are going to talk about trauma. I hope it is informative and helpful. I would like to say that I am not your mental health professional, and I probably don't know you personally, so this is just information. This is not official counseling or advice from me, but I hope you enjoy what you're going to hear. Hi, friends. This is Bethany Jennings, and you're listening to We Should Talk. It's a podcast where we talk about anything and everything to encourage, equip, and empower you to be a decent human. Let's talk. Hi, friends. Let's dive right in. So this is going to be, I'm going to try to make it orderly, but it's a very big topic. So let's talk about the kinds of trauma. So there is complex trauma. Complex trauma is it continues over and over again in an interpersonal relationship, like abuse or violence in the home, bullying at school, that kind of thing. So complex means it is ongoing and repetitive and, it's complicated, it's complex. There is repetitive trauma, meaning trauma that continues over and over again, which is a lot like complex trauma, except for that it's not necessarily like interpersonal relationships. So trauma that continues over and over again, the repetitive trauma is more like hospital procedures, and like you have to have multiple surgeries, or you're undergoing chemotherapy or something like that. So that's you have to go back to that in order to get better or whatever. So repetitive trauma. There is vicarious trauma, meaning you are a witness or a bystander to a traumatic event. Maybe you witnessed someone, being abused, or you witnessed someone. So you weren't the one being abused, but you saw someone being bullied. You saw someone undergoing trauma. So that's vicarious trauma. Acute trauma is a single overwhelming traumatic episode, like a car accident or a house robbery or something of that nature. So it's a single incident, as opposed to the complex trauma that we talked about first, that is recurring. Historical trauma. The literature says historical trauma is like racism or something like that. Maybe you've not experienced it yourself, but based on historical events, you experience fear in certain settings. And then developmental trauma. And we're going to get more into that one. Developmental trauma is obviously trauma during your childhood, like neglect, violence, abuse, witness to death, something like that. Okay, so talking about developmental trauma, meaning trauma that you experience in your childhood, let's talk about possible traumas. There are very obviously typical traumas like abuse or neglect or things of that nature, obviously. But there are also things that may not be quite so obvious. For example, not being seen or heard, or having a parent who is molding or shaping you because of their trauma that they've not healed. Having a parent who lives through you vicariously, like they didn't achieve certain goals, so they're pushing you to do it. Being told certain emotions make you weak or undesirable, or like a complete lack of boundaries, like your parent coming to you about their marital issues, or certain oversharing that is not appropriate at certain ages, or them getting majorly involved in your interpersonal relationships to an abnormal extent. You could also have a parent who focuses on overcompensating for things that they lacked in their childhood, right? There's a spectrum here, so you can lean too far to one side or to the other. So you can lean too far, I had no discipline, so I've got to discipline you, or I had too much discipline, so I'm not going to discipline you. And so either way, the child ends up suffering. Having a parent who denies reality that you're going through, having a parent who focuses very heavily on appearance, which again could go back to the vicarious, could go back to the lack of boundaries and you being able to express yourself in certain ways. But focus on appearances in like your body has to look a certain way, or you have to do your hair a certain way, or things like that. The being emotional support for parents, that kind of goes back to the oversharing about their own issues, or having a parent who can't regulate their own emotions, and so you kind of become the live-in therapist. There are also like specific wounds that you could get into if you go really deep into the developmental trauma. There are father wounds and mother wounds. So father wounds, like that could show up as trust issues, right? Like if your father wasn't really present in your life, or you experience a lack of trust towards yourself and others now because of that. A lot of times that'll show up as you attracting people who mirror your lack of trust in you, right? So you'll attract people who also don't trust, and that makes for a very, very tough relationship. Another father wound is the not good enough wound. So if your father was very hard on you, this can look like you not feeling good enough, or you not feeling worthy, feeling like you always want more and you're never happy with what you have. Like you're never, ever satisfied. Abandonment issues is another father wound. If your father, not just like he physically left, but even emotionally, if he wasn't emotionally available or he was absent, this can show up as attracting emotionally unavailable people. Relationships often burn out after a while, and you're quick on to the next one, and you feel afraid to be by yourself, but you also fear being left. And so you're constantly cycling relationships through your life and holding on to nothing because you don't want to be left, so you're going to leave first. And so it is a terrible, terrible cycle. Abandonment issues are real. And then, of course, a father wound would be abuse. If you watched your father abuse your mother or experienced abuse from him yourself, then you may think, that's how a relationship is supposed to be. If he's very controlling or dominating, you may have suppressed your feelings or something like that, or you struggle to set boundaries. That's a very big deal in any healthy relationship, is to have boundaries and to respect boundaries. I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. Have and respect your own boundaries and the boundaries of others. So when they say you got daddy issues, that's actually a real thing. But they don't really call them daddy issues, right? You can also have a mother wound, right? And they could be very similar. But this is what they would look like. So if your mother was super critical, you have a very loud inner critic. Like you're always criticizing yourself in your brain. If your mother was unapproving, you probably feared judgment. If your mom was like super passive aggressive, then you lack confidence in your own judgment or in your own decisions. If your mother was unavailable, you may not be able to express or even understand your emotions because you didn't see that modeled. If your mother was codependent, you were never really allowed to set boundaries without feeling guilty, then you're going to have really weak boundaries as an adult. If your mother was controlling, then you immediately default to the most rebellious option available in your adult life. And if your mom was pessimistic, then you are prone to self-sabotage. So, back at trauma, These are all things that can happen developmentally, right? In developmental trauma. So let's look at those again. So the trauma types are complex trauma, meaning like it's ongoing with an interpersonal relationship. There's a repetitive trauma. So like chemotherapy, something like that. There's vicarious trauma, meaning you are traumatized because you had to watch someone else experience trauma. Acute trauma, meaning it's like a single incident, like a car accident, something of that nature. Historical trauma, and then developmental trauma, which we just kind of deep dived into there on the side. So let's talk about... So we talk about what trauma is, well, like what it can look like, where it can come from. I feel like it's very important to note that trauma is not just, oh, my feelings get ruffled. You know what I mean? It's more than that. Like trauma literally affects it affects your brain, the actual organ, the brain. So a lot of times when you recall traumatic events, the part of your brain that would light up just to think about a memory, a happy memory, that part of the brain don't even light up. What lights up, what really is active, not lights up, but what is activated when you are thinking of a traumatic event is the survival mode portion. So trauma and brain development is very, very connected. Like they're not two separate things. They're very connected. So typically the top tier, like how your brain would function the most, would be cognition, and then social emotional, and then regulation, and then survival mode, right? But instead what happens is it's literally, when you have developmental trauma, it's literally inverted. And so cognition is the smallest portion, and it's almost like constant survival mode. So instead of it being cognition's the highest or the biggest portion, it's cognition's the smallest in developmental trauma. And survival's the biggest. So instead of cognition, social, emotional, regulation, and then survival, it flips and it's like, oh my gosh, I got to survive. And then you regulate, and then social, emotional, and then you're actually thinking things through. And so brain development and experiencing trauma during those times is huge. So that's on the developmental side, but even with acute trauma, even with a single incident, your brain does not function the same as it pertains to that event. It is very, very much a scientific and biological thing going on with your body as it pertains to trauma. So what is happening? Why is your body doing what it's doing? So there are 4 main trauma responses. When you experience a trauma, what people call I was triggered, which, by the way, is extremely overused. It's like a catchphrase now. It's like a, what's that word? It's just like people just throw it out there. Like it's just trendy at this point. Not everything is a trigger. We need to be very careful how we use that terminology, because honestly, it's inappropriate to use it when it's not really triggering you towards some kind of emotional stress. So anyways, there are 4 major trauma responses when someone is triggered. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Now, fight or flight, we're pretty much like, my fight or flight was up. I didn't know what I was going to do, right? So we're accustomed to hearing those. And freeze is pretty obvious. And then there's that other one, fawn. So let's talk about what we do know first, something that we are familiar with. So fight. The fight response is like you're angry, you feel like you're entitled to retribution, and you're very aggressive, and you're just attack mode, and you want to control every situation. Or you bully to get what you want, right? If you feel like you are threatened, then if you choose the fight response, if your body's choosing the fight response, it could look like any of those things: anger, entitlement, aggression, attacking, controlling, or bullying. If you choose flight response, if your body is saying we should roll out of here, right? We should fly out of here. Then it'll look like anxiety, fear and panic, avoiding things, avoiding certain situations, certain settings, constant worrying, perfectionism. Actually, a lot of people don't talk about that. Perfectionism is like, well, it's not perfect yet, I can't put it. It's not perfect yet, I can't. It has to be just right. It has to be just right. It's because you're not really wanting to go into that setting. You're avoiding it, or you're always busy, right? You're real flighty. You know what I mean? Always busy, preoccupied. You're not engaging where you're at. That is actually a flight response. There is, of course, freeze. So fight, flight, and here's freeze. Freeze is like, I think a lot of people do this. They don't even realize what they're doing. They like being a couch potato. Like you don't want to do anything. Or you collapse physically. Or you become extremely depressed, or you feel extreme shame. You begin to disassociate with certain people. Like if you're in a setting and it's just too much, you become disassociated. And you can also be extremely indecisive. Like, I don't know what to choose. I don't know what to choose. You have frozen as a response to trauma triggering. And then there's fawn. So this is the one that honestly is not really talked about a whole lot, in my opinion. I think it's becoming more talked about, but not. The other three are more talked about. I'll leave it, I think, anyways. So fawn is like people pleasing. I was just fawning over you, right? So people pleasing, or trying your best to avoid conflict at all costs, or having zero boundaries, or not knowing how to say no to certain commitments. You prioritize others over your own needs. Excessive flattery, just like compliment after compliment after, like, don't get me wrong, I like a good compliment. But at some point, it almost loses its value when it's all you do, because it's not really you trying to appreciate me. It's you responding to not wanting to be disliked. And so that would be fawning, or exploiting certain, emotions of other people, just doting over them, but not really for them. It's for your own comfort. So those are the trauma responses. Now, they can look like different things. Like it could be procrastination. It could be feeling like you're not good enough. Your thoughts are everywhere. You need to plan everything. You have trouble focusing, so it's brain fog, or you don't want to ask for help. You don't want to be a bother. You have a fear of success, and so you self-sabotage. Remember, we talked about that earlier with one of the parent wounds. Fear of failure, and so you don't want to mess up, so you don't even try. But then on the flip side, the fear of success is, I don't want to be too good, then I have to live up to that. Neither of those are healthy. Everybody talks about fear of failure. Nobody wants to talk about fear of success. It's like, oh no, what if I'm really good and then I have to keep being really good? That's actually, it can be a trauma response. And just being resistant or defiant. Everything's just no matter what. Now, some people have started understanding their body's responses to the traumas. And so they'll do what's called trauma blocking. And that's, trauma blocking is like an excessive, I'll give you some examples. So trauma blocking is like an excessive use of social media, or compulsive mindless scrolling, or that's part of that disassociation, right? That we talked about earlier. For people who do drink alcohol, it would be binge drinking. You're off work, it's time to drink, right? Or excessive mindless eating. Oh my goodness. We're like, oh no, not the drinking, but we talk about the eating. We're like, oh, that seems normal. It's not normal. So excessive or mindless eating, even when you're not actually hungry, that could be trauma blocking. You're trying to distract yourself from the trauma. Compulsive exercising to reach a goal that you're never satisfied with. That's part of that never being satisfied we talked about. I think we talked about that with the some of the parent wounds. And so we look at certain things let me just pause here. We look at certain things and we're like, oh yeah, but that's also pretty okay because exercising is good for you. Well, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. So you can exercise to the point of hurting yourself, right? And even if you don't hurt yourself physically, you become mentally consumed with appearance. You could become mentally consumed with achieving some kind of goal you've set for yourself. And as soon as you hit the goal, you're like, that's not good enough. And you push yourself even further. Again, just because it's not something that, society may label as inappropriate, like drug use, doesn't mean it's good for you. So anyways, being uncomfortable with being alone is another way to block. So being uncomfortable with being alone, and so you stay in a toxic relationship, or you always need a project. You've always got to be working on something. You can't just sit with yourself because then your thoughts show up and you don't want to deal with them. Compulsive online shopping. Believe it or not, compulsive shopping can be a response for trauma block. It's a way you can try to block that trauma, to not think about it. And then you end up in debt, and then you have more stress on you. And honestly, it's amazing. It is amazing how much our body affects, like, what our brain, like, it's not interpersonal. It is a interdependent relationship there. Your body and your mind, and how we react to things, and what we do on the physical side, and the stressors that come on with that. And I don't know. Anyways, I'm rambling. Let's move on. Also, becoming a workaholic. Having poor boundaries for your work, including being available 24/7. Oh, nobody wants to talk about it. But being, quote unquote, available 24/7, meaning you don't know how to turn off that phone because you don't want people to abandon you, or think that you don't need them or something like that. You know what I mean? It's all trauma responses, friends, even if we don't want to admit it. Those are things we do to block trauma responses, rather. So what should we do instead? Instead of blocking the trauma, we need to work on processing the trauma. It's very difficult to do that because that means you actually have to feel your feelings and know what to do with them. So just some things to consider. And maybe it's not you, but maybe you know someone who has been through some traumatic events, and maybe they do have some trauma. And this may help you to sympathize with them. Even if you can't empathize, you can sympathize with them. Again, remember me talking about your brain, different parts of your brain activate when you recall a trauma than if you're just recalling a normal memory. So here's what you need to realize. Your nervous system has been basically hijacked, and it's not your fault. And even if you can't understand it, like why you're acting, you are reacting. Understand that your body is acting. Your body is responding, even if you can't understand it. Your body is doing its best to keep you safe, as best it knows how. And so talk yourself through that, right? So, okay, my nervous system's been hijacked. I may not understand what's going on right now with my body, but it's trying to keep me safe. I need to look after myself. Like, remember that, think, okay, this isn't going to be forever. This feeling's going to pass. And it's very important when this is happening that before this is happening, you have a safety plan. So I know when I'm feeling this way, I actually need to respond this way. When I feel like I need to fly, like I have flight response, I need to be still. When I feel like I have the fight response, I need to be still. Don't immediately react. Think about what actually needs to happen. And then once you realize, okay, my nervous system is hijacked, my body's trying to protect me, I'm trying to take care of myself, it's okay, it won't last. To help it pass then, ground your senses. I've experienced this a lot of times with disassociation. I get overstimulated in really large settings or really loud settings, which can seem really odd because, my whole life I've traveled with Dad, or, now I travel with David, or I travel to speak or sing at stuff on my own. And so it seems strange that I would become overstimulated or overwhelmed in large crowds or in loud settings. But I do. It doesn't have to be like church, but it can even be like a restaurant where the music's extremely loud or there's multiple TVs going, like a Buffalo Wild Wings, something like that. I can become very overwhelmed. And so I have to ground myself. I know there are different things you call ground. I don't mean like go outside and find some grass to put my feet in. That's not what I mean. I mean like ground your senses, breathe, co-regulate, and then get support for that. So what are different ways that we can actually ground? What is grounding, first of all? Grounding is, it's like using techniques to help your nervous system. It helps us connect the here and now instead of the there and then that may come up during a traumatic event or a traumatic trigger. It helps us connect our five senses when we feel things are kind of getting out of our control. You can use grounding when you notice you're beginning to disassociate. That's what I was talking about before. I do that not necessarily as a trauma response, but just because I get overstimulated. When a trigger is present, or you're experiencing intrusive thoughts or memories. Because, you could be sitting there and just out of nowhere intrusive thoughts happen. I know when I had Onyx, in that postpartum phase, it wasn't really postpartum depression, but it was like there are intrusive thoughts and people don't talk about it. People should talk about, like, they call it the fourth trimester, which is so funny because, tri means 3. Anyways, but the fourth trimester, people don't really talk about it a whole lot. But there's stuff going on with your brain because of the chemicals in your body. And so I'd just be sitting there loving on my baby, and then all of a sudden the worst thought would pop in my mind. And I'd be like, oh my goodness, I can't take it. And then I'd start crying. So, anyways, you can use grounding techniques when intrusive thoughts happen. One thing to remember about intrusive thoughts, also sidebar, is that they're intrusive. You don't own them. They're not there. When an intruder comes into your home, they don't belong there. And so they're not really your thoughts. They're intrusive thoughts. And so don't feel like a horrible person when you think them. Just reprogram, reroute your brain and ground yourself in reality, the here and now, not the there and then. So this is our 5 senses. So let's talk about our 5 senses and what that can look like. So sound. Hearing is a sense, right? So things I can do to ground for sound would be like listen to loud music or even soft music if that helps. Call someone to hear the loved one's voice. Put on like ambient music or sounds like waves or rain or a fireplace. I pretty much live with fireplace sounds. Our sleep machine does fireplace sounds, and that's what I love to listen to. Or read something aloud to yourself, right? This isn't disassociating. This is grounding. This is actually using your senses. What about taste? Taste. You can chew a mint or some cinnamon gum. That's like a very intense flavor. Or eat something spicy. I could sign up for that one. I love eating spicy food. Or just put some chocolate in your mouth and just let it melt. Like, don't just chomp it down, but just let it melt in your mouth and enjoy it, right? Touch. Hold an ice cube. People don't really think about it, but touch is very important. Maybe I feel that way because that's my number one love language is physical touch. But because it's so important to me that when a loved one touches me, it's also very important to me when someone I'm not comfortable with touches me. And so I'm like, I'd rather you not. But if I love you and I know you and I feel safe with you, that's totally fine. So touch. You can hold an ice cube until it melts. Go take a shower. Hug a pet, go play with your dog, hug a loved one, or like just get something that's got a really obvious texture, like a velvet or a fur or a silk or something like that. Just something that the texture will kind of bring you back to the present. Smell. Go smell your favorite essential oil. I know we got lots of essential oil users out there. Go smell an essential oil. Go light a scented candle, or smell something that reminds you of a good memory, right? I remember the smell of my papa's after shaving coffee every morning I woke up in their house. And that brings back a good memory for me. Or sight. Take inventory of what's around you. Notice, like, look around the room. Name the things around you. You could, people will often turn to their phones and be like, well, let me just scroll. No, that's kind of disassociating as well. So I feel like there are better options as far as sight. A lot of times with sight, we immediately think, oh, let me go to my phone and look at something. That's kind of still you getting away from the present. And one thing to remember about this is everybody is different, and what works for you could be something, might be something I didn't even talk about. It could be something else. And you'll just have to work it out. The people that you suggest it to will have to work it out with what works for them. And anyway, so that's grounding. Of course, you can always try therapies if you need it. I am definitely pro professional help if that is something that you, your family, your leadership agrees with. Basically, the whole goal of trauma therapy is to reduce the impact of the trauma. So a lot of times when we experience a trauma, remember we talking about the inverted needs, like instead of the cognition and then the social emotional and then we're on survival mode. Instead of it being inverted, it's kind of like that where we think everything is survival mode because the trauma is affecting everything. It's affecting our self-respect. It's affecting our positive emotions. It's respecting our healthy attachment to people. And so that overpowers all of the other things. Well, trauma therapy is not necessarily, the goal is not to completely take away the trauma. You can't just remove memories from your brain. I mean, maybe if there's like a certain alien that can, but so far as I know, humans can't just remove certain memories from brains. So it's not to reduce, it's not to eliminate it, but to understand that it is trauma, but it's not life. Because what happens is we let the trauma and the event or events, depending on the type of trauma, rule our lives. And we let it just take over every decision and every relationship. And so instead of letting it be the boss, the therapy kind of helps us learn how to put it in its place. The impact of the trauma, instead of affecting everything, we can put it in one area and say, okay, this happened to me, but this does not define me. This is not going to determine how I live my life. This trauma happened to me, but I'm not going to let it keep me from having healthy relationships. And I'm not going to let it affect my positive emotions nonstop. And I'm not going to let it affect my health for the rest of my life. That's very, very important. And so if you need help, get help. So, like I said, trauma is a huge topic, and this has been a longer than normal episode. But I still don't think I covered everything. But if you have questions or if there's things you want to ask, you know how to reach out. You know how to let me know that. Again, you can always hit me up on Instagram if you'd like to. Bethany Lane Jennings, BethanyLayneJennings. Hit me up in my inbox, or if I, happen to post, what would you like to hear about? Feel free to ask me. And again, I'll do everything I can to help you be a good human. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Well, that was fun. I'm glad you stuck around for the whole thing. And thank you for talking to me today. Y'all go like and follow and review and do all the podcast things that people do. And don't forget to be a good human.